Hey, Lauren, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Morgan. You sound great.
Okay, now I can hear you guys. Okay, yeah, it was, I clicked it like 5 times and it was like, no, I don't feel like promoting her. And I was like, but I need you to. Cool. Just want to check.
Nope, I can hear you. I assume you can hear me as well.
Oh yeah, that was really loud in my ear.
Really loud.
Oh my gosh, I need to adjust my settings.
Lauren, I can't hear you though.
Can't hear me.
Ooh, now I can.
You sound a bit far away though.
I just realized my headset's plugged in.
That's
What do I put on? The speaker is like right next to my computer, so I just thought it was coming out of the computer.
That sounds much better.
Yes.
Better?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way better.
Hey, Lauren, I read Brad's email. Those 7 goals look reasonable. Do we have issues with those? Or are there more detailed challenges with those? I don't know if you've read it or not.
For the comp plan?
The ones that HKC sent.
Oh,
out to
no,
their
I
group,
didn't
too.
actually see it.
Okay.
Oh, his email that he just sent?
He just sent it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's,
Got it.
okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to get Gerald in here. Just FYI, as people join, I don't believe there's a waiting room, so
Okay.
we might have
We'll-
public people start coming in
Yes.
here. But I did create a staff chat in Teams, so.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Assuming this is Gerald Williams of the City Planning Department, we're good so far.
Yeah, that's the actual Gerald Williams.
Yeah, I had to use my other email because I think this whole thing is set up on my work email address. So
It definitely is.
Lauren, who is HKC now? Who's the,
I think it's Lisa Briscoe.
okay, that's what I
She's
thought.
the
It's-
executive director.
reading your email, it sounds as if it sounds a bit combative or like we haven't been helpful. And I didn't think that was the case. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It just,
Yeah, I'm reading it now too. The voice is, I agree.
yeah, it is.
Huh. need to get on their email list.
Kyle, we can hear your phone buzz whenever you get a Teams message.
Do you want me to turn it up? So what you're saying?
That'd be great. Thank you.
That was my Halloween costume, Bobby.
Good afternoon, everybody. If you're here for the historic preservation meeting related to the comp plan, you're in the right spot. We will begin promptly at 3:30. Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you're here for the plan on the comprehensive plan update related to visibility and historic preservation, you are in the right spot. We will begin the meeting promptly at 3:30. Thank you for joining us. Once again, thanks for joining us, everybody. We will start promptly at 3:30. Please use this time to visit our webpage if you haven't done that. Make sure your sound works, and we should be good to go shortly. Thank you. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks again for joining us, everybody. We're going to start in about a minute. If you see staff looking from side to side, it's not that we're not paying attention. We're monitoring this and the chats and several other screens. So if you do have comments, you want to drop them in the chats, please let us know. If there are questions we can answer, we will do so. But we plan on starting the process in just a moment. Thanks again for joining. All right, thanks everybody. It's right at 3:30. We promised to get you started on time, out the door at time. My name is Kyle Elliott. I am the division manager of the Long Range Planning Division. My job on this meeting is basically to make sure we start and get you guys up and going and set some expectations. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Williams, our director, to kind of get you started, and then staff will take you through the process. Once again, if you do have questions or comments, there's a couple different ways to communicate with us. You can use the chat features. I think you can raise your hand as well. There will be plenty of opportunities throughout the process to communicate with us too. So thanks again for your time. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Director Williams.
Great, Kyle. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Williams, Director of City Planning and Development. Thank you all for joining us today for our KC Spirit Playbook conversation regarding the strategy area of visibility, and in particular focused in on historic preservation. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, you're going to hear from a number of different staff members that are going to provide you an overview of not only the overall updating of the city's comprehensive plan, but particularly today, focusing in on the historic preservation elements of that plan. So you'll have the opportunity to learn more about the work that we've done to date to update the city's comprehensive plan, the work in analyzing the existing plan as it relates to historic preservation, and those historic preservation recommendations that would be embedded within the city's new comprehensive plan. So as Kyle said, there's a number of different ways you can participate. Certainly, please put comments into the chat. We have staff in position to be able to capture those, capturing notes as well. We're monitoring things on a number of different platforms to make sure that we're capturing all of your feedback and comments. Again, we are looking at a plan that is representative of all hosts and manners of physical development in Kansas City. And again, today we're talking about all those aspects citywide as it relates to historic preservation. So we look forward to reminding you of things that the city has accomplished on this front, talking about the things and work that collectively as a community will continue to do, and want to hear feedback about those newer considerations and thoughts about historic preservation and about how those should get captured in the city's planning document, its overall guide for land use and development for the course of the next generation. 20 years, a long time, probably a blink of an eye in relation to some of the historic resources we talk about, but nonetheless, this is the document that we want everybody to rely on and see as a reference as it relates to physical development and in particular historic preservation. So with that, I'll turn it over to the team to take us through the presentation. And again, I thank you in advance for being here, and we look forward to your comments and participation.
Okay, I think that's my cue. I'm Gerald Williams. I'm team leader on the comprehensive plan update. I'm just going to say a few quick things and hand it over to Brad as quick as I can to get into the meeting. So just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. As Kyle mentioned, we have a raise your hand feature if you have a question. I also encourage you to just put that into the chat, and we'll be answering those live as we go. Here's an example of where the raise your hand and enter chat comments buttons are. Next slide. So, as Jeff mentioned, this is a part of our visibility conversation, and we kind of broken our public engagement into these four pieces: visibility, which deals with historic preservation and urban design and public spaces, and mobility, which deals with everything transportation. Those two processes are going on now. Both are kind of in their winding down phase, and we're getting ready to kick off our livability strategy sessions, which will be about neighborhoods and housing and things like that, and serviceability, which will talk about sustainability and how we grow, and infrastructure and priorities related to that as well. So keep your eyes open for news about upcoming meetings related to both of those things. Next slide. This just gives you an idea of how our plan is going to be organized. We have identified a vision and 13 goal statements through our public engagement through our empowerment committee. And now we're kind of focusing in on the more specifics of the plan. These objectives you see at the bottom of the screen are where all of our recommendations will live, and we'll relate those back to our goals, to our vision, to our topics. That's what we're working on now, is take what we've heard from you and then identifying those specific recommendations. These are our 13 goals. I won't read those off individually. But those kind of guide everything we're doing in the plan. They talk about what we want to achieve over the next 20 years. And then, as I said, these objectives in meetings like this is where we dive into the details about how we achieve these goals and other things. Next slide. So the objectives, as I said, is where all of our recommendations live right now. We have a lot of them. As you can see, preservation is one of them, and we have highlighted in green here many others that are related to preservation, right? So we're going to focus. This is really kind of a draft list, and we are kind of working on reducing and consolidating to get this down to a more manageable size. But these are all kind of different topic areas that our recommendations will address. Preservation is certainly key, and then we have a number of them that relate back to preservation that we're working on as well. Next slide. So I don't know if this is where I kick back to Brad or not. Perhaps it is. Brad, I think this is my segue to you.
Good morning, or afternoon, excuse me. I said I'm Brad Wolf. I'm working at the Historic Preservation Office. I'm going to lead the discussion on the recommendations for the preservation plan. So I thought I'd just give a quick recap of the existing preservation plan. Basically, it's structured and draft updates, and then we can do a wrap up at the end. So we'll stop periodically as we go along, so allow you to give some input as we go through the existing recommendation and the updates. So feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand. So preservation can mean a lot of different things. Here's some said we have abundance of great historic resources from great industrial buildings in the crossroads districts. Our parks and boulevards are great religious buildings, housing, multifamily, and even our commercial buildings. So, and just to kind of give a recap, this is actually from the preservation plan. And really the idea of preservation is not to create a museum. It really is to identify those character defining features of our city and basically promote preservation and really preserve those to basically capture Kansas City's unique sense of place. So it's not just the buildings, it can be fountains, boulevards, trails, landscapes, battlefields, and archaeological sites. So there's a lot of different types of preservation that can take place in the city. I mean, obviously the rehab of buildings is probably one of the most visible, but make sure you kind of think broadly when you're thinking about in terms of preservation. So our current plan as part of the focus plan is basically a plan for meaningful communities. The existing preservation plan had 5 aspirations or goals that kind of guiding goals similar to what we do with our overarching comprehensive plan. Then it had 4 initiatives or core strategies to basically to emphasize how those will be implemented, and then specific action steps and recommendations, and there were 74 total of those. So these were our 5 aspiration goals of the existing plans, and really it dealt with survey, basically identification of existing properties, basically improving the economic viability of preservation of historic resources, talked about modifying basic regulations to encourage preservation, basically education or public awareness of preservation, and then also heritage tourism as an economic development tool. So obviously people visiting historic sites can be a strong economic program for the city. And under each of those, there were specific core strategies. I was not going to list them all out, but there were 14 core strategies related to those goals. And just to give you an overview, we weren't really planning to change any of the overall aspiration goals or core strategies as part of this process. They're all very good, and they can be continued forward in our new plan. We're probably focusing more in on action steps and recommendations related to those goals. What needs to be updated and changed. And what we did, we basically staff reviewed it, and also we had Vicki Notais reviewed it, our existing action steps. And we went through those and basically have recommended changes to the existing steps. So 53 of them we thought were actually still good recommendations for action steps, and we didn't recommend any substantial change to those. 18 we had updates to, and 3 we were recommending for removal. So I thought we just kind of delve into those. So on the left, I basically have the core strategy related to the change. So in this case, increasing the volume of survey of historic properties. In particular, this one talked about basically getting funds for survey. So basically assure that the city or partner agency apply for grant funds on an annual basis when they're available. And then basically creating a volunteer survey guide as part of the creation of an online survey database. So currently we do have a basic survey guide, a volunteer survey guide. It's paper, so we have electronic format. I think the idea is it needs to be updated and reflect current technology and how we're going to be using it in the future. And speaking of that, improve the ability to evaluate, apply, and disseminate survey data. So really one of the basic steps is to update our historic resource survey plan. In the hierarchy of plans, this would be similar to like an area plan or a corridor plan. It's more specific than our comprehensive plan. So we get into the idea of creating a matrix on what's important, prioritize areas for survey. So basically updating our existing historic resource survey plan. And also realizing that most survey nowadays takes place through electronic format and is available online. Survey LA was a good example of that. So recommending creating basically an online survey database that the public and staff can obviously map and submit survey information for historic properties, and then disseminate existing survey information we have on properties to make it easily accessible to the public. And the last one, specifically to archaeological programs, there's basically two components we have. We do have an archaeological survey master plan, which we'd recommend updating along with our historic resource survey plan. And then what we have is also, it's called a predictive model. Basically, it's a map showing areas that have potential for archaeological resources. Basically, we also recommend updating that as part of the process to make sure it's current. So really, those are kind of the three recommendations we had for basically in relation to survey and recognition of historic resources. I didn't know if anybody had any comments. You can put them in chat or raise your hand, hopefully. I thought we'd stop for a minute and allow you to comment on those.
We've got a couple people with their hands up. I'm going to unmute Dan Coffrin. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? I want to make sure I did this properly.
Yep, we can hear you.
Dan, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think the idea about updating the survey is excellent. What we have now is good, but it needs to be updated. And so that's kind of a low-hanging fruit insofar as the work having been done in the past. We already have a pattern there. We know how to do it. I'm with Historic Kansas City. We could be very helpful in identifying areas that were not identified before, if you wish. As the saying goes, if you can't identify it, you can't restore it. So I'm 100% behind that particular goal.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I see a hand up for Sarah. You can go ahead and speak.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you.
Good. So I am curious what the environmental impact. Okay, let me start over. So internationally, there's been a lot of discussion about the future of our planet. And I know that a big piece of moving forward for the city is ensuring that we're preserving our environment. And I'm just wondering how we're positioning historic preservation as part of that, because oftentimes it's more quote unquote greener to save and restore what's there versus tearing down and starting over, even though that may be the quote unquote cheaper option. how are we going to continue, which we have a little bit on the commission, but how are we going to continue to, I guess, address that angle of historic preservation as well and encourage owners and CIDs and other stakeholders that that's the way we need to move, if that's what we think we need to do.
Yeah, and I think the idea of sustainability is definitely a topic overall in our comprehensive plan that we're integrating in. I think it could probably cross over to a number of sections, how we integrate those types of comments. Some of it, we were talking about rehabbing, and we'll get a little bit more into this later in the presentation, but basically making sure that rehabilitation of older properties obviously is encouraged, and also is basically financially make sure it's very viable. Probably the two components that would help to preserve properties and making them sustainable. Obviously, we talked about, we've heard mentions of providing affordable housing options, a lot of areas, good quality affordable housing in particular. So I think there's a lot of crossover there in various sections of the preservation plan that those comments probably need to be integrated.
I see one more
A couple
hand
more?
up to
Yep.
speak.
Yep.
Stacy, you can go ahead.
Hi, hello, Brad and Bo and Kyle, and thank you for everyone for allowing us to take part in this. I appreciate so much what the Historic Preservation Landmark Commission do, and it's been my intent to help my neighbors go through this application certificate of appropriateness more. And the one thing that I would really like to see happen is for your department to have more teeth. And part of that is because, you know, there has been a movement in my neighborhood to get more people really doing the certificate of appropriateness. But when people do it and then they see somebody else make changes and they don't get the slap on the wrist or whatever, I see other people start to say, well, so-and-so didn't have to do it and so-and-so didn't have to do it, so why am I doing it? So I just wanted to find out if giving the Historic Preservation Department more teeth, you know, more enforcement or enforceability, I guess, is on the horizon. I didn't really, and I apologize because I am distracted by my day job here. So if you mentioned anything about enforceability, I didn't catch on to it. Is that something that we could still get in with this new comprehensive plan?
Yeah, so we're basically, that's why we're getting input from right now. So if that's one of the comments, we actually have a section really on basically regulation that would probably be appropriate to integrate comments like that on. But yes, thank you. That's actually what we're looking for in terms of comments. So I said we're still in the getting input and draft stage, so we're not past anything yet.
All right, I think in the interest of time, we will have the first 2 to 3 people to raise their hands, go ahead and speak as we go through this. But let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Here we go. So our next one really is dealing with economic viability, our core strategy to eliminate disincentives for preservation. This one actually was proposing for elimination. It was really, there was a basically parking requirements can be an issue with redeveloping larger buildings. Basically for historically designated properties, there isn't a requirement for parking anymore. And for a lot of these like mass transit corridors, which some of them have a lot of historic buildings on, like Main Street, Prospect, Troost, etc. A lot of those are exempt through that way. So we didn't feel the need to, there is a tool already in place to eliminate those parking disincentives if somebody wants to pursue those. And then also, basically we talked about strengthening and streamlining the historic preservation ordinance. One thing that's coming up lately is a demolition delay review and the deconstruction requirements. So basically, looking at a citywide review of demolitions of properties. Basically allow for delay until or basically notification to see if it's potentially listed. And these for properties that actually aren't in historic districts in particular. And then in terms of sustainability, if a property is demolished, basically adding a deconstruction requirement. So as many materials can be reused as possible, because there are actually a lot of good features on these properties. And then this one is basically a couple of updates and a removal. So the idea of our review and regulatory process for renovations, we did adopt a rehabilitation code since focus was established. But obviously we need to continue looking at issues with preservation and adoptions of new international building codes and energy codes. So it's something we need to be aware of and be mindful of, and take into account preservation issues. Basically, there was a section on the reuse of large buildings, basically allowing or encouraging the mixed use of larger older buildings, which I think we are doing pretty well now, but it's always something good to encourage because sometimes they can be very complicated to reuse. And then we talked about having an ombudsman, but in this case, we have a general development concierge that helps applicants through the development process, including historic buildings. So we were suggesting that be removed at this point.
Brad, we've got a hand up.
Sure.
Dan, I'm going to let you talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think the demolition review is very important. We've had a number of experiences in recent years where structures were taken down with demolition just by going to the counter and pulling the permit. And I would hope that a principal recommendation coming out of this part of the program or the planning process would be a really good demolition review ordinance. And one of the questions in the chat was, would that be limited to properties that are locally designated or in locally designated neighborhoods? Well, yeah, of course. But to answer that question, I think it should be broader than that, because there are a number of properties that have historic value that have not gone through that sort of approval process. So that I think it'd be wise to have any structure over X years, over 30 years of age or something like that, would have to go through some sort of a review before it's demolished, because we're just losing too much inventory right now. So I'm 110% behind that one.
And yes, just to kind of answer everybody's question, properties that are on our Kansas City register already have to go through a demolition review. So if it's in a locally designated, but this, I said, what we're talking about really is a citywide type of review for properties that aren't in local districts, because right now there is no review that Dan brought up. So a lot of people just, pull the permit and it goes down without really anybody getting any notice. So it's really, the demolition delay ordinance would be on properties that actually aren't designated in particular. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands at this time, so we can probably go ahead.
Basically the idea is also in policy and goals is to integrate preservation goals in the city process, policies and plans. In particular, this one deals with abandoned or endangered historic properties. Updating our policy and procedure, in particular, noting that the homesteading authority would be the specific body to work with to look at acquisition of significant historic properties for redevelopment, establishing mothballing and maybe a fund to basically mothball national and local significant historic buildings that are abandoned. And then this is a more general one. We do have some organizations locally that do deal with open space preservation, but the idea of basically open space, trails, archaeological sites, and other landscape elements, basically a land conservation type program. And I think there is groups already that help us do that, but maybe formalizing it and creating a program would be the idea. So. And then another policy, one that was mentioned in the previous plan, but the idea of creating design guidelines for areas of the city. These would not be mandatory guidelines. So sometimes we've been integrating those into our area plans. At the back of an area plan, you might have a set of guidelines, but basically the idea is to help neighborhoods envision what their areas could be and have those guidelines out there. There's actually a great set of guidelines developed for the Santa Fe neighborhood that doesn't have any mandatory design review, but basically give a vision of what they'd like to see and some ideas of what they could do. Basically, work with the land bank to establish guidelines for addressing basically significant historic properties in particular. And then encourage public entities basically to reuse historic buildings as community anchors. This kind of goes off the idea of the federal government trying to locate in significant historic buildings as a priority, but kind of reflecting that idea, if the city's looking for new space, basically we'd encourage the reuse of older buildings in particular as one of the considerations for our city programs. So I think that is that section. If you want to pause comments and we can get some input and thoughts on those. You know, if anybody had any.
Yeah, we've got a hand up from Jennifer. You should be able to go ahead and speak.
Hi there. Thank you. I think a lot of these, my name is Jennifer Reinhardt. I think a lot of these policies are really great recommendations and will help get some investment into these properties. I'm curious though, if there's been any consideration for partial activation of buildings. So working with the building department to issue permits where the whole building isn't ready, but perhaps a portion is, and then will allow for, you know, funding mechanism to then fund repairs to the rest of the building.
That's actually, I hadn't really talked about that, but actually that's something we definitely probably want to, look into and see if that is an issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll give it another couple of seconds if anybody else wants to raise their hand for this section. Let's see, I've got a name, Shields, that did have their hand raised and they lowered it. Shields, you should be able to talk if you wanted to go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
I'm Catherine Shields, and I'm very excited about the work that you're doing in this whole area of the plan, but certainly in terms of historic preservation. One of the things, an action item that I think we need to talk about, I know we talk that one of our goals is educating the public, but I think we have an internal city hall issue with education. As I've tried to work on a variety of historic preservation projects, I haven't found economic development EDC staff to be particularly knowledgeable or supportive of historic preservation. I haven't seen the economic development staff out of the city manager's office to be particularly supportive of historic preservation. So I think one of the action steps that ought to be considered in this plan is how do we educate ourselves internally, not just the mayor and council, but also the staff that is so closely involved with helping economic development projects succeed. How do we educate them on the importance to this city of maintaining our historic buildings and finding viable and vital reuses for them? I think that's just a huge area that needs to be worked on.
Thank you. And actually, you actually are hit on one of the topics in our actually next section. So you're anticipating where we're going. Actually, I might be able to
Thank you for that. We've
Thank
got a
you.
couple more hands up, Brad. I just wanted to let a couple more people speak. Trying to see who I've got on here. Megan, if you wanted to go ahead, you should be able to talk.
Hi, Brad, I think you might have just said you'll touch on this, but going off of the last comment made, helping people know how important it is for historic preservation, I was curious if there's anything in the plan to help people understand historic tax credits and how that might be able to benefit them, which again, you might be gearing up to talk about that, but that was something I was curious if it was included.
I don't think I have anything specific for historic tax credits, but we have a general one for economic incentives, which I think would include the historic tax credits. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. Imani, if you want to let us know your comment, you should be able to speak now. I think we've still got you on mute, Imani. Let's see. She might be having some trouble there. Let's see, Amanda Laughlin, you've got your hand up. You should be able to speak now.
Hi, thank you. This is Amanda Laughlin. Two things, just kind of going back to the demolition delay. I absolutely 100,000% support something like that for all buildings that may be 40 years or older. I think it's a good way to document what could potentially be lost, even if development means that building will be lost. It's a good way to document that that occurred instead of waking up one morning and seeing a building gone. And I guess a suggestion for implementation is that we already flag properties that are listed in registers when there's a permit that's coming up. So I'm just wondering if the system would be able to flag properties that are 40 years old or older to just say, hey, this is something that we might want to look at if there's a demolition that's coming up, that city staff may be able to review it. And I know that that's putting a lot more work on you, Brad and Lauren, in your office, but I think it would be good to have some type of review of things that come up. So I definitely support the demo delay.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it would be, yeah, definitely setting up that system. So yeah, we could actually start that process. So thank you.
All right, it looks like Imani, we do have you unmuted if you wanted to go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll just read the questions that I have that I put in the Q&A. Maybe you didn't see them. I'm asking why the preservation of the historic buildings is virtually non-existent in the 18th and Vine Jazz District. If you can compare the use of tax credits, historic tax credits with downtown and the Jazz District, it really looks like there's a lot of inequity and discrimination going on.
I think with 18th and Vine, there have been a lot of challenges with that development. I think there are actually a lot of good things happening right now.
There's not. There's not.
Well, I mean, in the near future. I mean, I said I know they're still in the planning stage, but especially on Vine Street, I think there's at least the properties that the city owns right now. We are in the process of actually put a lot of money into the stabilization of the buildings and actually looking for their rehab and redevelopment of that area.
Yeah, it's not evident that anything's being done. As I said, if you compare that to what's been done downtown, the preservation, so-called preservation, 18th and Vine's been going on a whole lot longer than downtown, but for some reason they're able to get it completed downtown and virtually nothing is happening on 18th and Vine. Just compare it and look for yourself.
No, thank you. So, yeah, and then I think you had another question about basically net zero sustainable passive house construction.
You didn't answer my other question yet.
Oh, no, I said, I know 18th and Vine has been challenging. I think there actually have been a lot of good wins in 18th and Vine too, though. A lot of things that are about ready to happen, like the Rochester.
Every time I go to 18th and Vine,
Every time I go to 18th and Vine, another building has fallen in. There's virtually nothing being done down there.
I've seen a number of things done, but I
what
think
building
you're
has
right.
been
There's still more to
preserved?
be done. No, I think well, I said the city is stabilizing. It's stabilized a lot of buildings it's owned on Vine Street in the past
Which
couple of
one?
years.
Which ones in the past few years?
Basically